So I thought I would share with you some of my rumblings since the last time I talked, and so it's more frog speak, such as it is. I carry no illusions that it is prophetic in any sense. First of all, as it relates to the whole idea of the Barndominium, I got to tell you that I've had some fabulous stuff going on this last week or so. First of all, I think the new digs are coming into perspective. I'm looking at 40 acres. I'll be a little bit cooler, probably in the 90s in the summer and in the 40s or 50s in the winter. Yes, there will be occasional snow, and I don't like that, but if it melts in 4 or 5 days, I can hole up and read, and that works fine. I'm not a snowshoe, cross-country skier, snowmobiler, downhill, no, none of that. I mean, just scraping the windshield is all the snow I can stand for. So I also looked into the Barndominium and have worked some more on that, and have worked even on doing a gambrel roof, which, for those of you who don't know, it's either a Dutch style or barn style double angle roof that goes out and then down and then to flat sided walls. I think it'll be fabulous if it works that way. I have a couple of inquiries in, and then I would basically add the greenhouse to the south side of it and put the pond in there. And I'm looking at 4,000 or 5,000 gallons of water for the pond itself, and then another couple thousand gallons for aquaponics, and or to have different kinds of dirt and flow and what do they call it, CFR systems for various kinds of growing. It is on the order of an earth ship, except for the fact that I'm not pounding tires. I'm not going to pack earth. I'm not going to do rammed earth or anything like that. I'm not going to berm it into a hill. Foam insulation will have to work, and I think it will. It'll be about 4 months and 10,000 man hours faster. I did talk to a guy named Chet, who is a century builder, I think. He also has a few videos online, not very many, and went over and saw one of his building sites at his invitation, which was incredible. And he is nibbling at working with me on the Barndominium, even though they don't do them, which would be fabulous. And this is just incredible, the serendipity of this. I had a guy from California who has been doing aquaponics for years and years, and has already done about 80 or 90% of the things that I shared with you that I want to be able to do. Thermal heat sink, having extra water stuff, solar, that is not the photovoltaic, but actually heating water, and have water storage both for hot water, for water-based circulation system in the house, that is floor-based heating, and also to have a heat sink for the pond itself so that it extends the entire season for it. The tilapia, the aquaponics, the various kinds of stuff, he's already all done, and so I consider him a fabulous resource. And just to call out to you, I will be back. I mean, whenever one starts on a new process, the first thing that you realize once you get so far into it is that A, you don't know everything you need to know, and B, somebody knows a lot more than you do, and C, if you just listen to them, you could save yourself about 92 mistakes and redos. And so I'm trying to pay attention to keep that mantra in place. Secondly, and a bunch of you responded to this as well, it has to do with the whole, what's the history of the world kind of approach and association, and it has to do with megalithic architecture, pre-Diluvian architecture, the sense of how long we've been here, whether there have been cultures here before. We have basically an architectural system in this world, including the Smithsonian and others, that have dysfunctionally hidden from us much of the truth of Earth. And some of you, I have a few of you that said, well, my beliefs are that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. I think if you pile all of the things on, you will see that that cannot possibly be true. What is more than that, there is evidence here, and this is biblical. It's even brought into the biblical sense. You've got giants and gods and heroes and destruction. We also have, if you take a look at Petra, at Baalbek, at the various sites, the Bulgarian pyramids, Indonesia, the underwater stuff, the caves, the Peruvian and Bolivian megalithic stuff, Aztecs, the Mayans. You've got Stonehenge. You have Baalbek, for instance, has 1,000 or 1,200 ton, not pound, ton blocks that have been moved miles and miles. We are incapable of doing that. There is evidence of high-speed drilling that we can't even reproduce at this point, drilling holes this big around into granite, and the rotation rate is impossible for us even to do now with diamond cutting tools. We have evidence that there are 6-foot circular saws, like a table saw. I have a 12-inch table saw, right? It'll cut 3 inches of wood, 3.5 inches of wood. When you look at a granite block that has evidence of a circular saw on it, a pair of parallel circular saws, each cutting 6 feet into the stone, you have to recognize that those circular saw blades are not 6 feet wide, they're not 12 feet wide, they're more like 14 or 18 feet wide, because you've got a stem center. And now you've got two 18-foot saw blades that are cutting an 1/8 of an inch hole, and that the rotational rate, the feed rate, is vastly faster than we could do even on a much smaller basis. And they are perfectly parallel with each other and are cutting the rock into half. We have nothing like it, at least not that we know of. And these things are at least 6 or 8 or 10 or 12,000 years old. I suggest you take a look at Brian Forrester, who has a channel on here. He posts stuff almost every day. He travels I think he lives in Peru. He's in Peru and Bolivia. He's in Bulgaria. He's in Egypt. He's in Jordan and other places all throughout the area. And he points out megalithic materials all the time. Giant rocks moved hundreds of miles, perfectly matched, irregularly shaped, and pre-dynastic stuff. All things that existed before the Aztecs or the Mayans or the dynastic Egyptians or anybody else ever got to it. They found it and it was already done. I cite you to Brian Forrester and his channel on YouTube. He posts almost every day, 5-6 days a week. He gives you both current travels of his and views and visions that he sees, and also relays and reviews some of the past ones. He has done an excellent job of showing that the megalithic stuff predates the dynastic periods and the deluge, and probably much of it is more than 10 or 12,000 years old. There's also a channel called Megalithomania. They put all kinds of stuff out, again, traveling all over the world, showing you things that were impossible to have happened by cave people with copper or bronze chisels. And also Robert Schoch, the geologist, that basically looked at the Sphinx and said, it's impossible that the Sphinx has water erosion and is less than 12,000 years old, because there's no apparent source of water or flooding or irrigation kinds of things that would cause major water-based damage on the Sphinx and the cavity in which the Sphinx is without using water. It's not wind, it's not other stuff, and of course the face of the Sphinx has been worked over and it's in a totally different wearing pattern than the rest of it. So if you put all of these things together and take a look at a variety of other things, you will see that, for instance, Abraham Lincoln went and viewed giant skeletons during his presidency, 7 to 9 foot skeletons that predated white people being on North America. There were blonde-haired and red-haired giants. There are hundreds and hundreds of historical reports in newspapers and elsewhere of giant skeletons being found and reported in newspapers throughout the United States and into Canada, and most of those have disappeared thanks to the Smithsonian. So if you take a look at this, you will see that many of the things that we're being told and have been told all of our lives have been lies since we were children. And they, once you say, if you do, if you agree with me, once you say, well, those things are not true, our current history, our current events are not true, our recent past history is not true, the JFK assassination reports and stories and myth and conspiracy theory involving a lone gunman is not true. The 9/11 events of box cutters, Cessna pilot box cutters flying jumbo commercial jets into at pinpoint locations at 500 miles an hour at sea level and having the buildings drop free fall for 100 stories as though there was no resistance at all, that's not true. Once you put those together, then I ask you to say, well, if those things are not true, what is? That's the question. If those things are not true, the first question is, then what is, and or what happened? What really happened? And the second thing is, do I look with discernment at everything I'm being told? Do I begin to question everything I'm being told? If we know that history has been worked over, then we have to say to ourselves, I think, why, how, to what extent, what could possibly be true, what can we scavenge from what we have been told to come up with truth or something reasonably approximating it, and why did they lie to us? And if you take a look at, and I know this steps on some toes, if you take a look at going back to the Sumerian times, that's kind of our earliest documentable written structure of truth. Obviously there are some ancient sources in the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, some of the Eastern Hindi stuff and the Buddhist stuff going back 5,000-6,000 years. But the Sumerian tablets are pretty much clear, clay tablets, fired, imprinted, fired, and saved, and 1 million or so of them, that clearly tell us some of the things that those people at that time knew, and whether or not any of that has any bearing on our lives today. And I will tell you it does. So let me add another piece to this, and that is that the common vernacular by which most of us came to the Sumerian tablets is a guy named Zecharia Sitchin, who was not a PhD researcher. He was more of a, I don't know whether I'd call him a commoner or not, and I don't know exactly his past, but many of us were led to look at the Sumerian tablets for all kinds of content, including that which Sitchin provided. And part of what he provided was a record of gods or masters or ETs or Nephilim or fallen heroes that basically nurtured and enslaved and engaged and enlightened the humanity, those of us that would be identical to who we are, and that this may go back 20 or 30,000 years, and that they used us and even hybridized us maybe for their own purposes and for their own ends. And I'm going to say to you, this steps on all kinds of places, that this ET business makes some sense. And I'm going to say to you that even as a kid, when I read the Greek and Roman historical stuff, I said, you know, these guys being gods does not make any sense to me. And why would they have all of this mythology? Why would the Norwegians or the Norski or the Vikings have it that there was all kinds of godlike intrusions into the Hindi stuff, the Japanese stuff, Indonesia, South America, Peru, and into Egypt and to Sumerian times? How is this all possible? And Greek and Roman history as well. How is this all possible? And why would they all be making this stuff up? And it never made any sense to me. Well, what makes sense? I'll tell you what gave me an enlightenment about it was a Star Trek episode in which the Star Trek guys landed on a spaceship, and when they landed on a world, and when they landed on the world, what they found were all the Greek and Roman gods. The Greek and Roman gods said, well, we weren't ever gods. We were more elevated, more advanced beings that got to be treated like gods because we could do stuff that nobody else could do. And the little light bulb went on, and that was 30 or 40 years ago. It was kind of like, wow, this is different stuff. And what I'm going to say to you is that both the Star Trek episode, that it was probably more true than not, and that it told us more than they wanted to tell us. That basically that it was a disclosure, in effect, of here's a little tidbit of the truth. So when some of you say to me, well, I have had to believe the biblical perspective that the earth is 6,000 years old and everything which allegedly predates that was actually dropped into the space. I'm going to say to you there are two problems with that. One is we now see thousands, if not tens of thousands or 100,000s of images that predate 6,000 years ago, and pretty clearly do so. And secondly, if our God set us up for 6,000 years of culture, and it is going to end in the earth and nothing else existed 6,001 years ago, then why would a God be so deceptive as to put all of these things in here to confound us, to challenge us, to make us question our reality? That doesn't make any sense. If we have a beneficent God, that doesn't make any sense. Why would he, it try to deceive us in ways that are devious at best? So I would say to you to take a look at every source. And I know, again, this steps on toes. Many of you that follow me are fairly fundamental Christian people, and you say, well, the Bible is an unimpeachable source. And I'm going to say to you, no, I don't think it is. I think, the Old Testament that was scabbed onto the New Testament is rife with exaggerations and modifications, and that the Romans, not the Catholics, not the Christians, but the Romans modified the biblical sources, the biblical chapters, and even the biblical content pre-300 or so AD, and we need to take a look at it like everything else. So moving on to what is true today, and my whole idea and thought and engagement with you over the last couple of months, which is everything is a psyop. And what I have just shared with you is everything has been a psyop for at least 5,000 and perhaps 12,000 and perhaps many more years than that, okay? Which makes it a monumental problem. It makes your head swell up, right? But looking at the current affairs, I see Conservative Black Reporter, I see all kinds of other sites that are saying, woohoo, here we go. This Durham guy and Trump are going to squeeze, and Barr are going to squeeze on Trapper and Clapper and Brennan, and they're going to make them squeal, and all the little players are going to come out of the woodwork, and we're going to get to the truth of all of this. And my God, the whole world is, the deep state is crashing down. I'm going to say to you, and for what it's worth, for what I bring to this, Barr will never bring down the deep state. And somebody said, well, he's going after the deep state. And I said, no, he is one of the deepest of the deep state. He is a vessel, an alligator that hangs out at the bottom of the swamp. I mean, maybe he is a bottom-feeding, water-bearing swamp creature that doesn't ever even come up to the surface, or if he does, there's just a pair of eyes that show up every once in a while, and then you see him gently sink to the bottom. That's what he is. And so I use him as a touchstone by which I say, it ain't true. And what I've said to a couple of my subscribers who are just certain I'm on the wrong path, and they've tried to help me, and to their great credit, I've said to them, when I see Clapper and Brennan frog marched into court to be indicted on 20 charges each, including treason, then I will have to come on to YouTube and say, oh my goodness, I was the biggest mistaken guy on the entire deal. And I don't think that's going to happen. So why do I say that? Well, because, number one, because Barr is linked to the CIA clear back to the 70s. Barr's connection with the deep state goes clear back to his father and the OSS and the predecessor of the CIA, which goes clear back to the 1940s and is spreading out across the spectrum from there. What I ask you also to see is that the Democrats and Republicans, the neocons, the deep states, the cabal folks, the banksters are all in on this, and they're in on it 15 layers deep. It is entirely corrupt. Every piece of this is corrupt. We hear, and we heard during the Obama administration, the so-called Obama administration, which was no administration at all, that we were funding ISIS. That was the common rumor. Well, let me give you some news today. I ask you to take a look at True News, TRUNEWS. It came out, I think, yesterday or today. The principal reporter on this is Edward Saul. You can believe or not believe, engage or not engage in their Christian approach to it. But I'll tell you what, their news reporting is often excellent and unbiased and reflective and good, and I watch them. And he interviews, Edward Zoll interviews at about the 5-minute bracket yesterday, which would have been, I think, October 25th, a woman from Bulgaria named Dilyana Gevanjeva, okay? And that's not how you spell it. It's way more complicated than that. I think it's Gevanjeva. And she has been reporting and checking on sources of munitions and rockets and other mortars and that kind of thing, which have been funded into ISIS through Bulgaria, Serbia, Croatia, and from and through NATO and NATO transportation and the Pentagon and Pentagon officials and military army officials who are working both in the private and public sector, buying and selling these arms, trafficking them through Serbia and Croatia, even having NATO and private airlines ship them and send them, and they are ending up in ISIS hands in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. We're not talking about, oh gee, it's $59 worth. No, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. And we're talking about giant payoffs to private companies, to public companies, to traders. We've got this, there was this idea that Khashoggi was trading and that Khashoggi and his family had been trading all along. And of course, maybe he was done away with because he had problems. Well, I'm going to say to you that there are hundreds of occasions, if not thousands of occasions, where the U.S. military, the U.S. CIA, private parties, global guys, Blackwater, our mercenaries that are feeding on us and taking our tax money, are buying arms in Eastern Europe. They're buying them elsewhere. They are laundering them through Serbia, Croatia, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and elsewhere, and they are shipping them to ISIS, and they are using them against us to foment war, to justify building arms in the United States, France and England and elsewhere, to use them on the other side. And I think the grunts, the honest people, the decent folks, our military, are facing into evil on the other side, not knowing that the other side has been financed and armed and militarily facilitated by the same forces that are sending them into battle. And conversely, the ISIS folks are being recruited and trained and provided munitions and don't realize that they're just simply pawns in the system, and that they are both being financed by the military-industrial complex that's backed by the bankster Zionists that have been feeding on war and trading in our blood for hundreds of years. So the link to this, and I have segued a little bit, but I ask you to take a look at that report. It starts about 5 minutes into it. It is an excellent, it requires your concentration because she speaks with an accent, but it's an excellent report. So let's go back for the last 3 years or so and take a look at the Trump administration and all of this Q and Positive and SGT and all these other guys, little pea shooter X22 and Gematrian folks and all the channels that are telling us, you know, we're just 15 minutes from a breakthrough, right? Well, we're not 15 minutes from a breakthrough. We have waited now 3 years for Trump to do something. We have waited for him to scale down the wars. And he has announced 3 different times that he's pulling out of Syria, only to reverse himself, only to let the troops back in. This last one, he finally admitted that he was only drawing 28 troops down. And in the meantime, all of the deep staters in Congress and the Senate, anybody that objected to Trump's pullout in Syria, mark that person. That's the mark of the beast. They are the beast. Any of them, both Democrats and Republicans, know that if they screamed and cried about Trump pulling out of Syria, you mark them and know they are not for you. That is an absolute 100% deal. They are not for you. None of them. Do not vote for them. Find alternative candidates. Come up with a better deal, because they will not serve us. And what is more than that, all of this discussion about, do you remember when Sessions was good and he didn't do anything? Do you remember when he appointed Huber, and Huber was going to go to Utah and he was going to have 400 people and they were going to take on the 10,000, 50,000, 60,000, 120,000 indictments, and it was just a matter of days and weeks before that was going to collapse? Do you remember when I.G. Horowitz was going to release stuff? Apparently he's going to release a FISA thing now, and my suggestion is it will come out whitewashed and vanilla-ized, and nothing will be prosecutable. Do you remember when they notified us that Comey had done some violations and said it was not criminally prosecutable? Do you remember when Mueller came out and nothing was prosecutable? If in fact, and one of my other subscribers said this, had this the deep state been going to come down, Trump would have gone after Clinton for the Clinton Foundation and for Uranium One and for traitorous conduct, and she would have been convicted and hung 2 years ago had this been true. Had any of this been true? None of it is true. And so what I'm going to say to you finally is this. There are those of you who are on one side or the other. Most of the people that have checked with me and followed me are alt-right folks or alt-center folks or alt-communication folks or libertarians that are looking for the truth. And we have been led to believe that tick, tick, tick. The next thing is going to fix it. The next thing is going to fix it. That the alt community, that the generals, that the real guys, that Barr and Huber and Sessions and all the rest of these guys are going to go in, they're going to clean up the DOJ. We just have to sit and wait. We have to eat popcorn. We have to put what you see is, where we go one, we go all. We have to put it on our shirt, and we have to just sit and watch, because it's only just a matter of days or weeks or months. Well, days or weeks or months have gone by. Years have gone by. And on the other side, there are the folks that believe that once they get Trump in their sights, they're going to fix it, they're going to take him out, and everything is going to be better. And I'm going to tell you, it's like a Shakespearean play. And the psyop of the Shakespearean play is that there are all kinds of people dressed in red, and all kinds of people dressed in blue, and all kinds of people dressed in purple, and maybe some other color that's not political at all, sitting in the audience. And we've gotten through Act 1 and Act 2, and we're now into Act 3. And Act 3 has the red guys and the blue guys fighting with each other. And in alternate scenes, the red guys are going to take out the blue guys. And in the alternate scene, the blue guys are going to take out the red guys. And half the audience cheers, and then the other half of the audience cheers. And we're all getting more and more excited, because clarity and cleanup are just days or weeks away, right? Well, it is unquestionably coming to a crescendo, no doubt about it. We're coming to the total despoilation of this process, and it isn't going to end up the way the red folks figure or the blue folks figure. It's not going to end up that way. Here's what's happening as I see it. The guy that owns the theater, and it ain't us, has had these actors playing these two sides to engage and entertain us for the last 100 years, 150 years, but certainly for the last 20 years, since little shrubby piece of crap Bush, and into the Clinton thing, and into the H.W. Bush, so 35, 40 years. They have had us watching this like this is the deal. And what you don't and we don't understand is that they're just players, and they're there to entertain us. And while we're sitting in the theater, standing, yelling, screaming, encouraging the red actors and the blue actors to go at it and to take each other out, while they're doing that, quietly, surreptitiously down the aisles are the soldiers with the swords that are going to take us out. The smoke is starting to fog in on the audience. The reverberations are there. The vibrations of the music and sound are numbing us and dumbing us. The clouds are changing our chemical system, and the soldiers are coming on either side. These dark soldiers, not red, not blue, not army, not others, that are here to take us out. And in the end, the losers are the audience, the ones that watched, the ones that sat there fat, dumb, and happy and didn't look around the room to see what else was going on, while the soldiers came in, and they're going to decimate most of us and frog march the remaining survivors out to be chipped and FEMA camped. And when that happens, all of these actors that have been playing on the stage, entertaining us and polarizing us, are going to step to the front of the stage and laugh and watch. And the next scene that you will see after all of us are gone is they're all in Monaco playing at the crap games, having been paid off by their masters, and talking about how the country has been taken down and AI'd and chipped and enslaved from one end to the other. If you don't pay attention, look around you, not at the action. Look around at everything else that's going on. Look around. Take your eyes off Clapper and Brennan and the rest of them, and look at all of the other things that are happening, and pay attention to those, because they are ongoing and they are marching in against us. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom to financially, our engagement, travel, speech, limitations, all of it is closing in on us, folks. And if you don't pay attention to that, if all you watch is who's winning this week, you miss it all. Thanks so much for watching.